Machiavelli once said that human beings quickly get over grieving for their parents, but agonize endlessly over losing money. This wasn't empty cynicism. He had understood an uncomfortable truth, rarely admitted. On the stage of power, friendship is a disguise, and to trust someone is to offer them a loaded gun. We live immersed in comforting illusions. We grow up believing that kindness will be rewarded and that honesty will take us to the top. But reality is much colder and quieter. A blow in the dark, without warning. You're not going mad because you're suspicious, you're waking up. Machiavelli didn't write to soothe, but to tear off masks and expose the dangerous naivety in which we stubbornly take refuge. His words echo through history, warning us about false smiles and calculated hugs. How many friendships have we seen wither into exploitation? How many partnerships have turned into disguised blackmail? This text is not just Machiavellian theory, it's an uncomfortable mirror, and when you look into it, you may notice something unpleasant. You too have pretended to be a lamb while actually acting like a wolf. Everyone does this to some degree. That's why it's important to remember that there's no such thing as absolute trust. However, this is not about preaching sterile pessimism. It's a call for clarity, for the cold wisdom that sustains us in a world where even feelings are a bargaining chip. It's a bitter reflection because reality is rarely sweet. Perhaps it's time to let go of emotional innocence and understand what Machiavelli already said centuries ago. Allies are fleeting, loyalty is fiction, and the only truly lasting relationship is the one we cultivate with ourselves. Believing in friendship as if it were a fairy tale. You believe in friendship with the same purity as a child in front of enchanted stories because you desperately need there to be some truth in it all. Since childhood, the plot of the narratives we consume usually has strong bonds, unbreakable companionship, and ties that overcome any challenge. But the real world doesn't work like that. It's made of a murky, almost muddy substance, in which every promise has an expiration date and every emotional bond carries an invisible contract. Machiavelli identified this phenomenon very early on. In The Prince, he didn't express empty pessimism, but a sharp clarity about human relationships stripped of hypocrisy. For him, friendship was never a pure sentiment, but a passing strategy. You have to know how to dissimulate, he said. Conceal what? Affection, friendship, ties that deep down are just games of convenience. So why do we insist on believing in these bonds? Because recognizing our loneliness is unbearable. The romantic idea of friendship intoxicates us, comforts us, and gives us meaning. Machiavelli, however, would say that this we is just an illusion. In reality, there is me against them, and they sharpen their blades while smiling. Just look at politics, the corporate world, or content creators. You are valued even when you generate benefits. When you become a risk, you are discarded without remorse. It may sound cruel, but it's not personal. It's just the way the game works. The pain of betrayal, however, sounds personal, because we place trust where there was only convenience. How many times have we confused ourselves thinking that confessions made in confidence would be safe forever? We ignore Machiavelli's lesson: people hurt those they love less than those they fear. If they don't fear you, sooner or later they can betray you without a guilty conscience. In the game of power, friendship is temporary and fragile, the spectacle of make-believe. We live in a play in which the actors are not on the classical stage, but in offices, assemblies, social media profiles, and family gatherings. Smiling but calculating presence. Today the hug, tomorrow the stab. Have you ever noticed how someone becomes disposable overnight? A slip of the tongue, an ill-chosen word, a scandal. Those who once swore allegiance vanish like smoke. They were just rent contracts. It can be cruel, but when you understand that no one is obliged to be eternally faithful, you stop demanding miracles. And then you start to see people not as definitive enemies or friends, but as players. It's not about living in paranoia or isolating oneself. It's just about admitting that in power, even in intimate relationships, friendship is usually a resource, not a sacred value. Machiavelli didn't preach unbridled cruelty. He wanted people to wake up. To wake up is to realize that hugs sometimes hide blades, and that public praise can turn to spite in the blink of an eye. Those who applaud you today may throw stones tomorrow, not out of pure malice, but because it suits the game. Loyalty evaporates when you cease to be useful or, on the contrary, become a threat. In the game of power, friendship is as charming as it is treacherous. Ignoring it is naive. Trusting too much is strategic suicide. Once the curtain falls, you can see what's behind every smile. The betrayer doesn't come dressed in evil, but full of kindness, open to listening to your problems and promising solutions. Perhaps he even believes his own promises, until it's time to turn the tables. Machiavelli knew that betrayal, in this game, is not so much a moral defect as a survival tactic. To escape, you need to notice signs before they become fatal. Ambiguous compliments, silences that weigh you down, absences at the crucial moment. Knives don't come from afar, they slip into the back of your head while you're still trusting. The stab of Brutus. Julius Caesar, the Almighty, loved by the Romans, surrounded by friends. And yet he fell under the blades of his closest allies, including Brutus, his adopted son and confidant. Even you, Brutus. This phrase lives on because it shows that betrayal is a point-blank shot. And it doesn't mean that Brutus was simply cruel. There were political and personal justifications for his act, but the end result was still the lethal stab. Machiavelli wouldn't just lament, "Why have I been betrayed?" He would ask, "Why did I let him get so close?" It's a painful blow, but one that exposes our responsibility for our own downfall. As long as we maintain a childish view of the world, we will be easy prey for cold, experienced players who see friendship as a mere resource. Don't think that this logic is restricted to high politics or large corporations. It can be found in the relative who listens to your problems and then uses them against you, in the colleague who flatters you in public and spreads gossip in the corridors, in the partner who swears to love you while cataloging your weaknesses in order to manipulate you. Society has taught us to smile while hiding knives. From an early age, we learn that being honest is risky and that showing how we feel makes us easy prey. Machiavelli didn't praise cruelty but cleverness, seeing the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. And if everyone is playing, the greatest naivety is to imagine that we're not on the same board. The loneliness that grows. There's a loneliness that doesn't come from a lack of company, but from the impossibility of sharing your truths. It increases as you climb the steps in life, whether professionally or socially. The top is not paradise. It is an arid environment populated by unstable alliances and invisible fears. Machiavelli described well this isolation and the permanent suspicion of those who cannot show weakness. Observe, the higher one rises, the more caution one receives from others. Hugs become brief, conversations formal. People choose every word, extinguishing the spontaneity that nourishes genuine relationships. If you reveal a vulnerability, you run the risk of seeing it turned into a weapon, not out of pure sadism, but out of self-preservation, a silent law that governs the world. Carl Jung said that loneliness is not the absence of people, but the inability to share what matters. Leaders, executives, and public figures are often surrounded by sycophants, but who really listens to their fear? Who welcomes their anguish without turning it into blackmail or gossip? Rarely anyone. Hence the emergence of paranoia or cynicism, destroying great historical figures who ended up alone, even with crowds around them. The top has no mild climate but constant winds of intrigue, and loneliness becomes a condition for survival. People expect firmness, solutions, and fortitude from those in charge. Few care about the existential weight this carries. A paradox then arises. The more applause you receive, the less loved you feel. The greater the admiration, the less understanding you find. Many try to escape this emotional vacuum with superficial pleasures, addictions, and applause without substance. However, the only real solution is to accept loneliness as part of the price. If understood, this loneliness ceases to be a punishment and becomes a path to clarity. You begin to see who really sees you and who is only instrumentalizing you. Sleeping with the enemy. Anyone who has slept, knowing that they trusted the wrong person, knows the mental torture that dominates the early hours of the morning. The words, gestures, and silences of the betrayer reappear like a movie, and the pain is discovering that the trust you were given was used against you. It's not bad luck, but prolonged naivety. Machiavelli left a guide to breaking this cycle. It wasn't a manual for being loved, but instructions for political survival. The prince must be like a lion to scare off wolves and like a fox to avoid falling into traps. Behind this is the message that you either dominate the game or end up dominated by it. Confusing self-sufficiency with isolation is a common mistake. You don't have to close yourself off from the world, but build a strong mind that doesn't depend on applause, and a heart that doesn't sell itself for praise. Power doesn't disappear, it just changes stage. In the beginning, you depend on alliances to rise. Later, you need to keep your cool to avoid falling. Before, you sought acceptance. Now you command respect because respect prevents them from attacking you without restraint. Respect comes from the fact that you are impenetrable. If someone identifies your weakness, that's where they'll strike. It's not about eliminating feelings, but controlling them so that they don't become obvious vulnerabilities. Know more than you say less than you feel. If you appear independent, you become a less convenient target. Modern society has expanded the battlefield predicted by Machiavelli. Today it includes social networks, personal marketing, and digital reputation. A single sentence or message can destroy a career. The enemy is not someone far away, but someone who once shared a table and confided in you. Your best defense is anticipation. This process is costly. You feel cold inside. You think you've lost friends. But ask yourself, did you ever really have these friends, or were they ties of convenience? Often what we call friendship is just mutual emotional dependence. Liberation comes when we accept that most of the time the loyalty offered was just convenience, and the love blossomed over the usefulness you represented. That's when we decide to be a fox in the face of traps and a lion if we need to show strength. But above all, owners of ourselves. Machiavelli wasn't preaching sterile coldness, he was talking about authentic inner power, the only inviolable one, when all the masks come off. In the end, when the applause stops, you are left with your lucidity and a solitude that can also serve as a shield. No one is really your friend. This phrase hurts, but it sets you free. When you understand it, you stop expecting others to solve your life or to be eternally faithful. You stop pinning your fate on fleeting alliances. Facing reality is painful, but better than crying over recurring disappointments. Machiavelli didn't want to destroy human hopes, but to shake up our naive certainties. This is perhaps his greatest gesture of friendship, the raw, albeit uncomfortable truth. Having clarity doesn't mean renouncing all affection. It just means understanding that people change their positions according to the tide of interest. And however beautiful a bond may be, it can break in the face of pressures and opportunities. When you internalize this, you realize that blind trust is the biggest trap of all. It is possible to act kindly without being naive, to be kind without submitting, Machiavellian thinking doesn't cancel out our humanity, but it does break the illusion that friendship is an unbreakable bond in itself. Such a realization, paradoxically, can bring unexpected peace. By not demanding something from the world that it can't give, you suffer less from betrayals. You realize that alliances have a deadline, and you learn to value, if they exist, those rare moments of genuine affection, but without deluding yourself. This way, she doesn't allow herself to be manipulated by those who use compliments as bait. Perhaps this is Machiavelli's greatest lesson: not to be villains, but to understand the game and not pay the price of innocence. At the end of the day, those who govern themselves are better able to move forward. And if you're going to climb the ladder, do it with your eyes wide open, knowing that false friends may be at your side. There is no loss of goodness in this, but rather a maturing that avoids fatal blows. In the end, the loneliness of those who see the truth doesn't have to be devastating. It can serve as the basis for a rare autonomy, one that is not deceived by empty promises and does not allow itself to be seduced by flattery. In this sense, Machiavelli has ceased to be just an advisor to princes and has become a timeless messenger, whose voice echoes whenever we run the risk of falling into the same trap, blindly trusting those who can betray. The way out is simple and at the same time challenging. Recognize that every relationship is fragile and has its price. This way, we stop blaming others and start keeping a closer eye on our own expectations. With this, we have to find a middle ground between total isolation and naive surrender. To have the fortitude Machiavelli spoke of and still choose the moments to share feelings, knowing that, in the end, the only total security lies in oneself. It may seem that this lesson makes us cold, but perhaps the opposite is true. When you stop looking to others for a guarantee of happiness or salvation, you can begin to see them without so much fantasy and create more authentic bonds with less dependence. There are no absolute guarantees, and it is precisely by knowing this that individual freedom is strengthened. Machiavelli doesn't destroy hope. He adjusts our focus to what really matters: the awareness that human nature is fickle, and that we are only strong when we know the rules of this eternal game. In this way, we are no longer puppets. Seeing this game doesn't extinguish the possibility of love or friendship, but it does allow us not to be taken by surprise by the stabs that have already brought down so many hopeful hearts. Finally, when you understand, at the core, that no one is truly your friend, it doesn't mean that you'll live sad and lonely. It means you'll be ready for a more sober existence, less vulnerable to manipulation. That's when you start to make conscious, targeted choices, aware of the value and risk of each approach. At this point, perhaps you'll cultivate a more realistic form of companionship, without the shackles of fantasy, and then you might find something closer to true friendship than you ever thought.